A father opens his missing daughter's yearbook after 22 years of silence. Inside, he finds something that makes his blood run cold. A hidden clue, a name no one suspected, and a truth so dark it will shatter everything he thought he knew about the day she vanished. Spring 1990, Savannah, Georgia. Jamila Brown was 17 years old when she disappeared without a trace. No goodbye, no witnesses, just an empty bedroom and parents who would spend the next 2 decades drowning in questions that had no answers. Her father, Maurice, couldn't let go. While the world moved on, he stayed frozen in that terrible spring. Her room remained untouched, a museum of grief, posters curling on faded walls, shoes by the bed, laces still tied in careful bows. The scent of her shampoo clinging to clothes in the closet like a ghost refusing to leave. For 22 years, Maurice avoided that room. The pain was too sharp, the memories too raw. But his wife Lorraine finally said what they'd both been thinking. It was time to pack away the past, time to accept that their daughter wasn't coming home. So Maurice walked into that room one last time, and what he found there would change everything. He moved through her belongings slowly, each item a memory, a homecoming shirt, a friendship bracelet, the corsage from junior prom sealed in plastic. Then his hands landed on something he'd never opened before, a maroon yearbook, Jefferson High, 1990. He couldn't remember ever seeing it. After Jamila vanished, opening this book felt impossible. Seeing her smile frozen in time would have destroyed him. But today was different. Today, he opened it. He flipped through pages of teenage faces until he found her, Jamila Brown, confident, kind, full of dreams. The caption made him smile through tears. Future marine biologist. Thanks to my parents, Ms. Glover, and my girl Kendra, return my copy of The Secret Garden, or I'll haunt you forever. The Secret Garden, her favorite book. Maurice stood and scanned her bookshelf. Nancy Drew, Octavia Butler, Langston Hughes, but no illustrated edition of The Secret Garden. The book his daughter mentioned in her yearbook wasn't there. Why would she write that if she didn't have it? Maurice turned back to the yearbook, searching for Kendra's profile. Her best friend, the girl who used to be like a second daughter before grief drove everyone away. Beneath Kendra's photo was a phone number, scribbled in faded ink. His hands trembled as he dialed. The call went straight to an automated message. Disconnected. Dead end. But Maurice had learned something in 22 years of searching. Dead ends are just questions waiting for a different approach. His wife came home from the market. He showed her the yearbook, the missing book, the note. Lorraine's face tightened. They'd agreed to pack and move on, not dig up old mysteries. But Maurice couldn't stop. That book wasn't just a book. It was the last connection between Jamila and her best friend. Do you know where Kendra lives? He asked. Lorraine hesitated. She'd seen her once, years ago. Word was she lived in a trailer near Bay Street. Maurice grabbed his keys before Lorraine could protest. He slid the yearbook under his arm and headed for the door. Outside, the Georgia humidity wrapped around him like a warning. He climbed into his car, engine rumbling to life. He'd spent 22 years waiting for answers that never came. Today, he would follow even the smallest thread, even if it led nowhere, even if it broke his heart all over again. Because somewhere in that yearbook, in that missing book, in the silence between then and now, there was something, a clue, a name, a secret his daughter had tried to leave behind. And Maurice Brown was about to uncover a truth so horrifying. It would prove that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones hiding in plain sight. The trailer park sat on the edge of Savannah, hidden behind pine trees and overgrown brush. Maurice pulled up to a blue and white camper with a ceramic owl perched above the door. Kendra's home. He knocked. The door opened slowly. Kendra stood there, older now, lines etched into her face. When Maurice introduced himself, her expression shifted. Recognition, pain, memory. She invited him inside without a word. They sat at a narrow table, coffee steamed on the stove. Maurice placed the yearbook between them like evidence at a trial. Kendra stared at it, but didn't open it, as if opening it would release something she'd kept locked. Away for 22 years, Maurice flipped to Jamila's message about the secret garden. Kendra stood and walked to the cabinet under the sink. She pulled out a hardback book, The Secret Garden, Illustrated Edition. "I never returned it," she said quietly. After Jamila disappeared, I couldn't let it go. Maurice opened the book carefully. Inside was a makeshift bookmark. A page, torn from a fashion magazine, glossy, showing a young man in a denim jacket and sunglasses. No older than 17. Maurice stared at the name printed near the spine. Darius Hayes. The name hit like a punch. Darius had been in Jamila's graduating class. A kid with a reputation. Disciplinary problems. Rumors of manipulation and aggression. That's Darius, Kendra confirmed. Jamila got interested in him near the end of senior year. Maurice looked up sharply, interested how she started asking questions. Where he lived, what he did after school, whether I thought he was as bad as people said. Kendra paused. It was unexpected. We were never close to him. Did they date? I don't know. She never said. But something changed. She asked me to drive past his house once. Maurice pulled out his notebook. Where? Kendra gave him the address. Maurice wrote it down, his hand shaking. Anything else stand out? Kendra nodded slowly. She became distant those last few weeks, writing more in journals, taking walks alone. She mentioned talking to Darius once in the parking lot after school. What did she say? That it was nothing, just small talk. But her tone didn't match her words. She sounded cautious. Maurice felt something cold settle in his chest. Did she seem afraid? Not afraid, but changed. Less laughter, more silence. Sometimes she'd get this look in her eyes, like she was somewhere darker. Maurice closed the yearbook. Before he left, Kendra handed him a photograph. Jamila and Kendra at the beach, smiling, the ocean behind them. Maurice took it silently, his throat too tight to speak. As he walked to his car, his mind replayed everything. The photograph dot the name, the behavioral changes. All of it pointed to a connection no one had investigated, because no one knew it existed. Maurice sat in the driver's seat and stared at the address. The house where Darius had lived still existed. He started the engine, heading toward that neighborhood. He didn't call Lorraine. Not yet. No need to raise her hopes. First, he needed to see for himself. Because the question that haunted him for 22 years was finally taking shape. Not where is my daughter, but who took her. Maurice drove through Savannah's outer neighborhoods until he reached a new development. Wide streets, fresh pavement, pristine two-story houses with neatly edged lawns and trimmed hedges. Everything orderly, everything quiet. The address matched a beige home at the end of a cul-de-sac. A black car sat in the driveway. Maurice parked across the street. He took a breath before stepping out, walked slowly to the front door. Before he could knock, it opened. Darius Hayes stood in the doorway, framed by late sunlight, collared shirt, gray slacks, polished and controlled. Maurice recognized him instantly, though age had softened his face. Their eyes met for a moment. Nothing was said. Then Maurice identified himself, gave his full name, stated he was Jamila's father. Darius's posture shifted. Shoulders tensed. The polite mask dropped. The effect was immediate. "What do you want?" Darius asked sharply, his tone clipped, defensive. "I have questions about Jamila," Maurice said steadily. "I was hoping you could help," Darius interrupted. "I barely remembered her. Whatever contact we had in school was limited, unimportant." His words came fast. "I already spoke to police back in 1990. I have nothing new to add." Maurice stayed calm, though his thoughts churned. "I recently found something that raised questions, details that made me revisit that time." Darius dismissed him again. "We were never close, certainly not involved. Any suggestion otherwise is mistaken." He shifted. Restlessly, "We might have spoken occasionally, schoolwork, trivial matters, nothing personal, nothing that mattered." As Maurice pressed gently, Darius became more agitated. His hands flexed at his sides. His eyes flicked toward the street, scanning for neighbors. "I don't appreciate being confronted at my home," Darius said, his voice rising. "You're stirring up the past for no good reason." Maurice noted every defensive gesture, every evasive glance, every oddly specific denial. Then, without another word, Darius turned and walked back inside. The door closed with finality. Maurice stood there a moment longer, the unease in his chest now joined by something colder, suspicion. He walked back to his car. The encounter had answered nothing, but it had raised everything. There had been no empathy in Darius's reaction, no curiosity, no sorrow, just agitation, defensiveness, fear. Maurice drove off without a clear plan. But instead of heading home, he pulled into the lot of Morningdale Memorial Funeral Home. He needed to organize a formal memorial for Jamila, something he and Lorraine had avoided for years. Inside, he requested information, accepted brochures, a hollow formality, but one he needed to complete. With the materials in hand, he stepped back outside into the afternoon sun. Across the street, something caught his attention. A familiar figure exited a hardware store. Darius Hayes. He carried a shovel and a wooden box, both wrapped in plastic. Maurice stepped behind a parked car, watching. A moment later, Darius entered the neighboring flower shop. When he emerged, He held a bouquet of white hyacinths, Jamila's favorite flower. She used to keep them in a vase near her bedroom window. Maurice had left them at her memorial bench every year. Darius placed the items into his trunk and drove off. Maurice didn't hesitate. He returned to his car, started the engine, and followed at a safe distance. The black car wound through side streets, took a coastal route heading out of Savannah. Maurice stayed several lengths behind. The road curved toward Shell Bluff, an isolated area with scattered cottages, mostly empty outside tourist season. Darius turned into a gravel driveway leading to a small cottage near the cliff's edge. Maurice passed by, continued up the road, and parked behind a dense line of trees. From his position, he could see part of the property through the undergrowth. He waited. 10 minutes passed. Then Darius emerged, pulling a plastic garden cart. Inside were the shovel, the wooden box, a jug of water, and the bouquet of hyacinths. He made his way down a footpath behind the cottage. The cart rattled over uneven ground. Maurice followed at a distance, stepping carefully through brush and low-hanging limbs. The trail led to a rocky overlook with a clear view of the ocean. Wind steady, salt air thick. The faint scent of flowers. Maurice crouched behind a grouping of trees just above the overlook and watched as Darius Hayes began to dig. The soil resisted, packed hard with stone and roots. But Darius worked steadily, each shovelful deliberate. When the hole reached to feet, he stopped, opened the wooden box. Maurice couldn't see inside, but Darius stared at it for a long time. Head bowed, he pulled out papers, flipped through them slowly, as if reading letters memorized years ago. Wind swept through the clearing, pages scattered. Darius scrambled to catch them, swearing. He retrieved most. One disappeared over the cliff. He placed the white hyacinths into the box, closed it, lowered it into the hole gently, then shoveled soil back, tamping down with his boot, pouring water over the mound. When finished, Darius stood motionless, over crashing waves. Maurice heard him speak. "You can hold these memories now, Jamila." Maurice shifted. His shoe slipped on gravel. The sound echoed. Darius's head snapped toward the trees, stepped forward, shovel in hand. "Hello?" Maurice remained still, heart pounding. Darius advanced, scanning, looking directly at Maurice's hiding spot, then stopped, muttered about. Wind, turned back. He circled once, then returned to the cottage. Moments later, the car started, faded. Maurice emerged, crossed the clearing, retrieved the shovel, and began to dig. The soil gave way quickly. He uncovered the bouquet, dug deeper, found the box. He pulled it free, fingers trembling on the lid. This was it. Whatever Darius had buried. A voice froze him. "I knew. Someone was out there." Maurice turned. Darius stood at the clearing's edge, face twisted in rage. "What's in the box?" Maurice demanded. "I heard you speak her name. Put it down." Maurice didn't move. Began lifting the lid. Darius pulled out a handgun, raised it, dropped the shovel. Now, Maurice obeyed slowly, hands raised, shovel fell. Darius stepped closer. Maurice acted, grabbed his phone, thumb on emergency SOS. Darius struck it from his hand. The phone skidded near the cliff edge. Maurice lunged, tackled Darius. They struggled. The gun slipped, tumbled over the cliff. Maurice broke free, scrambled for his phone. Just as it teetered, he grabbed it, pressed SOS. Alert initiated. Darius rushed forward, threw Maurice down. Hands closed around his throat, squeezing. Maurice struggled, vision blurring, pressure increasing. Sharp sirens cut through the night, red and blue lights. Darius hesitated, grip faltering. Maurice twisted free, rolled away. Officers rushed in, weapons drawn. Darius stepped back, hands trembling. Surrounded, he didn't resist. Handcuffed, removed, Maurice sat gasping. Officer knelt beside him. He pointed toward the disturbed earth. The officer took notes, issued commands to forensics. Gloved hands pulled away layers of earth. First, the bouquet, then the wooden box. An investigator pried it open. Inside were stacks of folded papers, old photographs, small personal items. The lead technician examined them, passed them to the detective. The papers were handwritten letters, each dated from 1990, exchanged between Jamila and Darius. As the detective read, a picture formed. The letters revealed a hidden relationship. Jamila's tone shifted over time, from warmth to doubt to sadness. Darius's replies grew possessive, angry, erratic. One letter from Jamila expressed regret, mentioned her desire to end things, that she no longer felt safe. Darius's reply had no greeting, just one sentence repeated, "You must still love me," line after line, like a chant. Underneath were photographs, Jamila in different settings, some innocent, others not. In several, she was clearly restrained, expressions blank, confused, terrified. On the back of each, Darius had written captions. One read, "Had a great time at the cliffs with you." The most disturbing showed Jamila staring into the lens, face tight with fear. On the reverse, a rambling message. He wrote he could no longer control himself, that people were getting too close, that Jamila's refusal left him no choice. He ended with a confession. "I had to kill her, or they would find her and take me. She'll always be in my heart, even if no one ever knows what we had." Maurice stood frozen as forensics called out from deeper in the woods. They'd found where the soil had been disrupted, texture suggesting human burial. The team moved swiftly. Maurice's breath caught as fragments of clothing emerged, followed by bone. Personal effects pulled from the grave.fabric. Jewelry. A school ID. Jamila's name. Maurice stepped forward, stopped at the police line, hands trembling. The truth had surfaced after 22 years, buried just miles from his home. Detective Ramirez arrived within the hour. Maurice stood at the police line, watching forensic teams work under portable lights. Ramirez approached carefully, asked if he needed medical attention. Maurice shook his head. He couldn't leave. Not now. In custody, Darius Hayes began to talk. The evidence left him no choice. The letters, the photographs, the confession in his own hand. He confessed in detail. He'd taken Jamila to the remote cottage, kept her there for days. His obsession hadn't ended in high school. He'd promised Jamila they could be together again. That if she left Marcus, told everyone she'd gone away alone. They could start fresh, but Jamila refused. She told him that, after months of hoping he could change, she'd realized she was wrong. The final confrontation came when she tried to leave. Darius described the struggle near the cliff's edge, claimed Jamila had nearly pushed him over. Enraged, he overpowered her, struck her repeatedly with stones, panicked when he realized what he'd done. Instead of calling for help, he dragged her body into the woods and buried her. There, forensic teams found her skeletal remains. Confirmation came through dental records and clothing fragments. Maurice and Lorraine received the news in a private briefing. Detective Ramirez recounted Darius's confession word for word. Kendra was there as well. She sat still, hands clenched. When the detective finished, Kendra spoke. She remembered when Jamila first began asking questions about Darius. She hadn't understood why, but something had shifted in Jamila during those final months. Kendra had assumed it was curiosity. Now she knew it had been something more dangerous. Lorraine reassured her gently. None of this was Kendra's fault. Darius had manipulated Jamila. Jamila's compassion had been used against her. Ron Keller, the retired detective who'd once overseen the case, listened to the confession report. He acknowledged with regret that Darius had never been a suspect, because their relationship had been private, because Jamila had been publicly dating Marcus. Darius had gone unnoticed. Later that day, the Browns gathered on their back porch. The sun was setting, casting warm amber across the backyard. Lorraine placed a framed photograph of Jamila on the table. Not the portrait from senior year, but a candid shot. Jamila standing barefoot on sand, laughing, hair tossed by wind. Maurice sat beside his wife, their hands touching lightly. They didn't speak for several minutes. The weight of finality hung heavy, but within it was the quiet beginning of peace. Lorraine finally broke the silence, her voice measured but sure. She said they could begin to move forward, not by forgetting, but by remembering Jamila as she truly had been. Alive. Hopeful, full of desire to help others. Maurice nodded. He said Jamila had always wanted to believe the best in people, even those who didn't deserve it. Lorraine added that once Jamila decided someone was worth helping, she didn't give up, no matter the risk. That stubbornness, she said, had come from her father. Their grief no longer stood between them like it once had. It had become a bond, a shared wound that had endured years of uncertainty. Maurice spoke about how young Jamila had been, how she'd clung to the idea that love could change people. Lorraine didn't argue. She said the world needed people like Jamila, people willing to believe in goodness even when buried deep. Her mistake wasn't in seeing that potential. It was believing she could unlock it alone. Maurice wished she had told them what was happening, that she had trusted them enough to speak about Darius. Maybe, he said, they could have helped her see the danger. Lorraine responded softly that they would never know. But wherever Jamila was now, she believed their daughter understood how deeply they had loved her, that they had never stopped searching. As the sky darkened and stars appeared above the pines, Maurice and Lorraine remained seated, hands still joined. The pain of what they'd learned would never fully fade. But at last, there was truth. After 22 years of silence, They knew what happened. Jamila had not vanished into the unknown. Her voice had been quieted, but her story had finally been told. They would carry it with them now, not as a wound that refused to close, but as part of her memory, and in that memory, they would begin to heal. 1 week after the discovery, the morning sky above the Georgia coastline was pale and quiet. A thin veil of mist hung over the water. Boats rocked gently at the marina, moored and waiting. The silence on shore was mirrored by the stillness of those gathered. Friends, former classmates, neighbors, family, they stood in respectful quiet, boarding the boats that would carry them out to sea for the final farewell. Maurice and Lorraine Brown stepped onto the lead boat. Detective Keller and Officer Ramirez escorted them. Both had seen the case through to its conclusion. Both felt the weight of what had been uncovered. Kendra Williams joined them, a small worn book held to her chest. The Secret Garden, the one she'd kept for 22 years. Each guest clutched something: flowers, photographs, handwritten notes, all bound for the ocean, all part of a farewell to decades delayed. As the boats pulled away from the dock, Savannah faded into haze behind them. The Atlantic stretched endlessly ahead, gray-blue expanse that Jamila had once loved. Her dream of studying marine biology had been rooted in the tides and currents she read about as a girl. That dream had never come to pass, but today the sea would become her resting place. The flotilla reached a quiet stretch of water not far from Shell Bluff, just beyond sight of the cliffs where her remains had been found. The engines cut. For a moment, only the sound of waves slapping against hulls. Maurice stood near the bow of the lead boat, Jamila's ashes held in an urn of simple design, grey ceramic marked with faint floral carvings. His hands trembled as he turned toward the group, but his voice remained steady. He spoke of her passion for the ocean, her notebooks full of sketches of coral reefs and tide pool creatures, her childhood fascination with documentaries and shells. She once promised she would dive in every ocean on Earth, Maurice said, his voice breaking slightly. Now she belongs to the sea she loved. He opened the urn. The ashes caught in the breeze before falling to the surface of the water, drifting, dissolving, becoming part of the current. Beside him, Lorraine released a handful of white hyacinths, Jamila's favorite. The petals scattered across the waves like a floating garden. One by one, the other guests stepped forward, releasing their offerings: flowers, letters, small drawings, each gesture quiet but full of meaning. Kendra was last. She approached the edge of the boat, hands holding the book Jamila had once loaned her, its cover worn from years of handling, corners frayed, pages yellowed. She hesitated, then leaned over the railing and let it go. The book hit the water with a soft splash, began to sink slowly, pages fluttering open as it disappeared into the depths. Her whisper was lost in the wind, but the words were clear on her lips. "I'm sorry I never returned your book." They watched as the items floated or sank. Some guests wept openly, others remained silent, expressions solemn. Maurice stared into the water until the last hyacinth disappeared from view. The boats turned back toward shore. As they neared the marina, no one spoke. It was not a day for conversation. It was a day for release. The long stretch of unanswered questions had ended. The years spent fearing the worst had been validated in the most painful way imaginable. But the uncertainty was finally over. Jamila was no longer missing. She was no longer somewhere unknown. She was home. That evening, the Browns sat together on their back porch. The sun had set hours ago. Stars scattered across the black canvas above. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They simply sat with their memories, letting the stillness settle, letting the weight of the day sink into their bones. Lorraine reached over and placed her hand over Maurice's. He didn't look at her at first, but his fingers curled gently around hers, a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding. She broke the silence first, her voice measured but steady. "I finally understand what people mean by closure," she said softly. "It's not about forgetting. It's not about letting go of the pain." Maurice turned to look at her, waiting. "It's about knowing," she continued, "about having an answer, about being able to shift the weight, even just slightly." Maurice nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I don't feel whole," he admitted, "but I feel something closer to peace than I have in decades." Lorraine squeezed his hand. "We did what we could. We never stopped searching. We followed every thread, held on through every dead end. And in the end," Maurice said quietly, "we brought our daughter home. Not to a room full of posters and textbooks, not to the life she should have lived, but to the truth, to the sea, to a place where she could finally rest. She deserved better," Maurice whispered, his voice cracking. "She deserved the world," Lorraine agreed. But she got trapped by someone who saw her kindness as weakness, her compassion as an invitation. They sat in silence again, the night air warm against their skin, crickets chirping in the distance, the faint smell of jasmine drifting from the neighbor's garden. Maurice thought about the years that had passed, the birthdays uncelebrated, the graduations unwatched, the life Jamila would never live. He thought about the grandchildren they would never have, the career she would never build, the love she would never find. All of it stolen by a boy who couldn't accept rejection, who saw Jamila not as a person, but as a possession, who believed that if he couldn't have her, no one could. "Do you think she was scared at the end?" Maurice asked suddenly. The question had haunted him since the confession. Lorraine considered this carefully. "I think she was brave. I think she fought. I think she tried to survive. But she was alone," Maurice said, his voice breaking completely now. "She was alone and scared, and we didn't know. We couldn't help her." Lorraine turned to face him fully, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We didn't know because Darius made sure we wouldn't. He isolated her, manipulated her, made her believe she had to handle this alone. She should have told us," Maurice said desperately. "She should have trusted us. She was 17, Lorraine reminded him gently. She thought she could save him. She thought her love could change him. That's who our daughter was. Someone who believed in redemption, even when it cost her everything." Maurice wiped his eyes. "Roughly, that belief killed her. That belief was beautiful," Lorraine countered. "The world needs people like Jamila, people who see the good in others, who extend second chances, who refuse to give up on humanity, even when humanity gives up on them." Lorraine's voice was firm. "Especially then. They sat together as the night deepened, the porch light casting long shadows across the wooden planks, the house behind them quiet and still. Jamila's story had an ending now, not the one they'd prayed for, not the one they'd imagined during all those sleepless nights, but an ending nonetheless. The trial of Darius Hayes began 3 months later. The courtroom was packed. Media filled the back rows, sketch artists positioned near the front, cameras lined up outside, waiting for statements. Maurice and Lorraine sat directly behind the prosecutor's table every day, every session. They never missed one. Darius entered in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, eyes downcast. He looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than he'd seemed that day at the cliff. Prison had drained something from him, or maybe it was guilt finally catching up. The prosecution laid out the case methodically, each piece of evidence presented with clinical precision. The letters, the photographs, the confession written in his own hand. Expert witnesses testified about the remains found near Shell Bluff, confirmed through dental records and DNA that they belonged to Jamila Brown. Estimated time of death consistent with her disappearance in spring 1990. The forensic pathologist described the injuries: blunt force trauma to the skull, multiple fractures, defensive wounds on her hands and arms. She had fought back. She had tried to escape. Maurice closed his eyes during that testimony. Lorraine gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Kendra Williams took the stand on day 4. She described their friendship, the questions Jamila had started asking about Darius, the subtle changes in behavior, the distance that had grown between them. Did Jamila ever mention feeling unsafe? The prosecutor asked. Kendra nodded, not in those exact words, but looking back, yes. She became cautious, quieter, like she was carrying something heavy she couldn't share. Why didn't she tell anyone? Because she thought she could handle it, Kendra said, her voice breaking. She thought she could save him. That's who Jamila was. She believed people could change if you just loved them enough. The defense tried to paint a different picture, argued that Darius had been young, troubled, acting out of passion rather than premeditation, that the relationship had been consensual, that Jamila's death was a tragic accident during an argument. But the prosecution dismantled that narrative piece by piece. The letters showed escalation, possessiveness turning to obsession, obsession turning to threats. Darius had written about not letting her go, about making sure she couldn't leave him. The photographs showed restraint, control, fear in Jamila's eyes that couldn't be explained away as consensual exploration. And the confession, the one Darius had written on the back of that photograph, the one he'd buried with the flowers. I had to kill her, or they would find her and take me. Those words echoed through the courtroom. Undeniable, damning, final. On day 7, Darius took the stand. Against his lawyer's advice, he insisted on speaking, on telling his version. He claimed Jamila had loved him, that they'd planned to run away together after graduation, that she'd changed her mind at the last moment because of pressure from her family and Marcus. She was going to leave me, Darius said, his voice flat. After everything we'd shared, after all the promises, she was just going to walk away. So you killed her? The prosecutor asked directly. Darius hesitated. It wasn't like that. We argued. She tried to push me off the cliff. I defended myself. Things got out of hand. You struck her repeatedly with rocks. Is that self-defense? I panicked. I didn't know what to do. So you buried her in the woods. Went back to school the next day. Graduated. Got a job. Got married. Built a life. All while her parents searched desperately for answers. Darius said nothing. You let them suffer for 22 years. You attended vigils. You saw the posters. You knew they were drowning in grief. And you said nothing. Still nothing. Why did you bury those items at the cliff last month? The letters, the photographs, the flowers. Darius looked down. I wanted to let go, to move on, to bury the past. You wanted to bury the evidence, the prosecutor corrected, because someone was finally asking questions. Maurice Brown was getting close, and you were scared. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. First-degree murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. When the verdict was read, Maurice didn't react. He simply sat there, staring at the back of Darius Hayes's head. Lorraine cried quietly beside him. Not tears of joy, not relief, just exhaustion. The weight of 22 years finally lifting. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Questions shouted from every direction. Maurice raised his hand. The crowd quieted. Justice was served today, he said simply. But it doesn't bring our daughter back. It doesn't erase 22 years of pain. It doesn't answer the question that haunts us most. He paused, voice thick with emotion. Why couldn't she tell us? Why did she feel she had to face this monster alone? No one had an answer, because there wasn't one. 2 weeks later, Maurice and Lorraine returned to the courthouse for sentencing. The room was quieter this time. Fewer reporters, fewer spectators. Just those who'd been there from the beginning. The judge entered. Everyone rose, then sat again in unison. The familiar ritual of justice. Darius Hayes was brought in. His orange jumpsuit replaced with a suit his lawyer had provided. An attempt to appear more human, more remorseful. But his eyes remained empty, distant. The judge addressed the courtroom, outlined the charges, the evidence, the jury's verdict, then asked if anyone wished to make a victim impact statement. Maurice stood slowly, his legs unsteady. Lorraine reached up and squeezed his hand once before letting go. He walked to the podium, placed his written statement on the surface, but he didn't read from it. Instead, he looked directly at Darius. 22 years ago, you took my daughter from this world, Maurice began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. You didn't just kill her. You erased her future, her dreams, everything she could have become. Darius stared at the table in front of him, refused to meet Maurice's eyes. Jamila wanted to study marine biology. She wanted to save the oceans, protect endangered species, make the world better. Maurice's voice cracked slightly. She believed people could change, that love and compassion could reach even the darkest hearts. He paused, collecting himself. She was wrong about you. You proved that. But her belief wasn't foolish. It was brave. It was beautiful, and you destroyed it. Lorraine wiped tears from her cheeks. Kendra sat beside her, hand on her shoulder. You didn't just take her life, Maurice continued. You took 22 years of ours. Every birthday we celebrated without her. Every graduation. Every holiday. Every moment of joy tainted by her absence. His voice grew stronger now, anger replacing sorrow. You attended her vigils. You saw us grieving. You watched us search, and you said nothing. You let us drown in hope that she might still be alive somewhere. That maybe, just maybe, she'd come home. Maurice's hands gripped the podium. You buried evidence while we buried our hearts. You built a life while we lived in limbo. You got married, had a career, moved on. While we stayed frozen in 1990, unable to move forward because we didn't know. He took a breath. The worst part isn't that you killed her. The worst part is that you made her believe she deserved it. That she'd somehow failed you by wanting to live her own life. By choosing herself over your obsession. Darius shifted. Uncomfortably, still wouldn't look up. You stole her voice, her choice, her future, and then you tried to steal her memory by burying it in a wooden box at the edge of a cliff. Maurice's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But you failed. Because we found her. We brought her home. And now everyone knows what you did. Everyone knows that beneath your polished exterior was a monster who couldn't accept rejection. He stepped back from the podium, returned to his seat. Lorraine took his hand immediately. The judge then asked if Darius wished to speak. His lawyer advised against it. But Darius stood anyway. I loved her, he said quietly. Everything I did came from love. Maurice tensed. Lorraine held him back. What you felt wasn't love. The judge interrupted sharply. Love doesn't kill. Love doesn't imprison. Love doesn't silence. Darius sat down, face flushed with anger or shame. Maybe both? The judge proceeded with sentencing, her voice clear and unwavering. Darius Hayes, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. The evidence presented shows premeditation, extreme cruelty, and a complete lack of remorse. She paused, letting the words settle. You took an innocent life. You robbed a family of their daughter. You deceived law enforcement for over 2 decades. And when finally confronted, you attempted to destroy evidence and harm the very man who Dee spent 22 years searching for. Truth. The courtroom was silent, everyone holding their breath. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the murder of Jamila Brown, an additional 25 years for kidnapping, and 10 years for obstruction of justice. These sentences, too, run consecutively. The gavel struck, sharp and final. Darius showed no reaction. He was led away in handcuffs, out of the courtroom, into a future of concrete walls and locked doors. Maurice watched him go, felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness, because Darius going to prison didn't bring Jamila back, didn't erase what happened, didn't answer why she'd felt so alone that she couldn't ask for help. Outside, the afternoon sun was too bright, too cheerful for how Maurice felt inside. Lorraine stood beside him on the courthouse steps. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, she said, "It's over." Maurice nodded. "It's over." But they both knew it would never truly be over. The wound would always be there. The absence would always ache. They could only learn to carry it differently now, with truth instead of questions, with closure instead of hope that hurt more than acceptance. 6 months after this sentencing, Maurice stood in Jamila's old bedroom one final time. The room looked different now, emptier. The posters had been taken down, the books packed away, the bed stripped of its sea green comforter. But it no longer felt like a tomb. Lorraine appeared in the doorway, holding a cardboard box. Inside were the items they decided to keep. The photograph from the beach, her favorite bookmark, a few letters she'd written home from summer camp years before everything changed. "Ready?" Lorraine asked gently. Maurice nodded. He took one last look around, the space where his daughter had dreamed and studied and planned a future that would never come. Then he stepped out into the hallway. They were converting the room, not erasing Jamila's memory, but transforming the space into something that honored her life rather than her death. A small library and reading corner. They donate books to underprivileged schools in her name. The Jamila Brown Memorial Literacy Fund. It was Lorraine's idea, a way to keep their daughter's spirit alive. Her love of learning, her belief in second chances, her conviction that education could change lives. Maurice had agreed immediate. Jamila would have loved it. That afternoon, they drove to Jefferson High School. The principal had agreed to let them establish a marine biology scholarship in Jamila's name. Every year, one graduating senior with dreams of studying the ocean would receive funding for college. The first recipient was a young girl named Destiny, quiet, brilliant. From a family that couldn't afford higher education, she reminded Maurice so much of Jamila. It hurt to look at her, but it was a good hurt, the kind that meant healing, not festering. At the ceremony, Maurice spoke briefly, told Destiny that this scholarship came with a request. "Live the dream Jamila couldn't," he said. "Study the oceans. Protect the creatures who can't protect themselves. Make the world better. But most importantly, ask for help when you need it. Don't carry burdens alone." Destiny nodded, tears streaming down her face, accepted the scholarship certificate with trembling hands. Afterward, Kendra approached them. She'd been keeping her distance since the trial, unsure if her presence caused more pain than comfort. "Thank you for coming," Lorraine said warmly, pulling her into an embrace. "I'll never stop missing her," Kendra whispered. "Never stop wondering if I could have done something different." "None of us could have stopped what Darius planned," Maurice said firmly. "He made choices, evil choices. That's on him. Not you, not us, not Jamila." Kendra wiped her eyes. "I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping young women recognize warning signs, teaching them that isolation is a weapon, that secrecy protects abusers, not victims." Lorraine smiled through her tears. "Jamila would be proud of you." "I hope so," Kendra said softly. "I'm doing it for her, for all the girls who think love means suffering in silence." As they left the school, Maurice felt something shift inside him. Not closure, he'd realized closure was a myth. The wound would always exist. The absence would always ache. But acceptance, that was possible. He'd spent 22 years searching for his daughter in the places she wasn't. In missing person databases, cold case files, the faces of strangers who resembled her, always looking for what was lost. But now he could find her in other places, in Destiny's excitement about marine biology, in the literacy fund that would help hundreds of children, in Kendra's work protecting vulnerable women, in the scholarship that would send students to college. Jamila's life had been cut short, but her impact didn't have to be. That evening, Maurice and Lorraine walked to the beach where they'd scattered her ashes 6 months earlier. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Waves rolled gently onto the shore. They stood at the water's edge, hand in hand, watching the ocean that Jamila had loved so much. "Do you think she's at peace?" Maurice asked quietly. Lorraine considered this. "I think she's free. Free from fear. Free from pain. Free from the monster who tried to own her. I wish I could have saved her," Maurice said, his voice breaking. "You did save her," Lorraine replied firmly. "You refused to let her story end in silence. You searched until you found the truth. You made sure Darius faced justice. You gave her voice back." Maurice hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe Lorraine was right. For 22 years, Darius had controlled the narrative, had kept Jamila buried literally and figuratively in secrets and lies. But Maurice had dragged the truth into the light, had forced the world to see what happened, had ensured that Jamila would be remembered not as a missing person, but as a victim of violence who'd fought back, who'd tried to survive, who deserved so much better. "I love you, baby girl," Maurice whispered to the ocean. "Wherever you are, I hope you know that. We never stopped loving you. We never stopped searching. And we never will stop telling your story." The waves seemed to answer, rolling onto shore, retreating, the eternal rhythm of the sea, as they turned to leave. Maurice noticed something in the sand, a small white shell, perfectly intact. He picked it up, brushed off the sand, and placed it in his pocket. A reminder, a memento, a promise. Jamila Brown had disappeared in 1990. For 22 years, her family lived in the agony of not knowing. But her father had refused to accept silence as an answer, had followed the smallest clue in an old yearbook, had pursued the truth until it could no longer hide. Justice had been served. A monster was behind bars, and a young woman who'd been silenced by violence would be remembered for her kindness, her dreams, and her unshakable belief in the goodness of others. Her story didn't end in that shallow grave near Shell Bluff. It ended here, on this beach, in the hearts of those who loved her, and in every young person who would benefit from the legacy she left behind. Maurice and Lorraine walked back toward their car as darkness fell, the beach behind them empty except for the endless ocean. But they were no longer empty. They were healing.